The latest Ministry of Defence accounts revealed that it's lost track of £5.3 billion worth of equipment.
The favourite analogy is the closing scene from Raiders of the Lost Ark, just this enormous Aladdin's cave of stuff in some cases.
There are 270 different software systems in use by 50 separate contractors in 15 locations.
Think of a Tesco's and M&S and Amazon. How many of those businesses would be able to run as they do today if they were operating off information technology that was 30 years old?
Now defence experts are warning that unless there's a dramatic improvement, the system supplying frontline forces could collapse.
That's happened largely because of the lack of investment in IT, the lack of coherent management plans, the lack of communication between the owners of the equipment, and all those things eventually come together and there's almost a perfect storm created.
My name's Adrian Goldberg, and tonight on The Report I'll be asking, how can the MoD lose track of more than £5 billion worth of kit? And as the government prepares to slash the size of Britain's standing army, just what are the chances of finding the money to do something about it?
This is a pair of, standard boots. Yeah, so it'd be something similar to this that he would have needed.
You kind of regulation pair of boots, size 12.
Yeah, this is the sort of thing that they're all wearing, yeah.
Brenda Cooper from Wolverhampton still struggling to understand why her son couldn't get a basic piece of kit during his tour of Afghanistan last year. A pair of size 12 boots.
While he was out in Afghanistan last year, his boots were damaged at the beginning of the tour, and when he asked for replacement boots, he was told they didn't have any in his size, but they sent a pair that was 2 sizes too small. So he had a choice of wearing those or going on patrol in his boots that already had holes in. So, he had to put up with a whole tour of 5 months without proper footwear, and he only got a replacement pair when he came back on R&R, which was a few weeks before his end of his tour. So as you can imagine, I was livid. I don't feel it's good enough.
Brenda Cooper still doesn't know why her son didn't get his boots. As far as we know, the boots were somewhere in the system, but the army couldn't get the right pair to the right soldier at the right time. But then the armed forces don't know the whereabouts of quite a lot of equipment, and nearly half of its deliveries to Afghanistan are late. The Defence Secretary, Liam Fox, has admitted that the Ministry of Defence hasn't managed its resources well for many years, and a damning report published by the National Audit Office in March condemned the MoD for its consistent failure to keep tabs on the expensive gear it had bought.
While the department as an organisation is configured to manage a single supply chain, the information available to managers comes from a complex set of data systems designed to support several separate supply chains, which have significant interoperability issues.
What that means is that there were items logged on the MoD's computers which couldn't be found on the shelves, and items on the shelves which weren't logged on the computer. The items which couldn't be found are reported to include military hardware, such as guns and other firearms. The MoD bristles at the suggestion that valuable items have been lost. They just can't say precisely where they are. It was an explanation that failed to impress MPs on the Defence Select Committee last month, not least their chairman, James Arbuthnot.
To be unaware of exactly where more than £5 billion worth of assets are is something that shows that there is a real problem with the stock control, and we can't be sure whether equipment of great importance are in the hands of people we'd rather they weren't in, or whether they're simply lost or what. And so we are really concerned about it.
The MoD say that the things which I mentioned in the National Audit Office report aren't really missing. They're things which are in use, but they simply haven't been accounted for.
Well, that's what they say, but they aren't able to establish that. And it's all very well for them to say that they're not missing, they just don't know where they are. This is a concept which the Defence Committee had some difficulty with. I know that sometimes one loses one's keys down the back of the sofa and one thinks, I know that they're there somewhere, but actually, until you've found them, you don't know where they are. And the problem with not knowing where something is that it cannot be allocated to the unit that needs it most.
The MOD has made some limited improvements in tracking stock, but the National Audit Office last week refused to sign off part of the MOD's accounts for the 5th year in a row. One reason was the lack of accurate information about what equipment it holds and where. Take the case of Bowman radios, specially built for the British Army to ensure secure communications which can't be hacked into on the battlefield. The radios can be handheld, but are often built into Land Rovers and armoured vehicles. The National Audit Office says the whereabouts of more than 4,000 Bowmans is unknown. So where have they all gone? Francis Tusa is the editor of Military Logistics International, and he says that in the fog of war, keeping track of equipment isn't the first priority.
The core explanation for this, and again, some people may think that it's perhaps being a little too generous, with operations in Afghanistan and Iraq, where the pressure is on people in the field to, as it were, go out and do operations, frequently equipment is almost thrown into theatre as a priority, just get things out there immediately, and asset tracking is made a second priority, and that's why equipment goes missing. But it doesn't really help the service's case for more money for a defence budget when they sort of say, well, we didn't think it was important to track this.
So couldn't this problem have been anticipated?
There was an opportunity there to put in a management system that managed those radios, and the contractor who supplied the radios wanted them to put in a system called BLIS, Bowman Logistic Information System.
David Trevanian, a former senior manager at the MOD. BLIS was developed to make it easier to keep track of the radios, but Trevanian says that between 2001, when the equipment was commissioned, and 2004, when it was finally produced, the MOD abandoned the plan.
The MOD by then had decided it wanted an overarching system called James, and I think there were several iterations of James. There was James 1, James 2, and I think there was a plan to go on up to James 4. And the MOD said, no, we're going to have James, that will manage the radios. Of course, James was late, it didn't do what it was supposed to do on the tin, and they ended up with a lot of radios in service and no management system to track them.
The MOD has told us it abandoned BLIS because it wasn't an effective tracking system, but it's only now, a decade on from the original commission, that the new tracking system, James, is ready to come on stream. And BLIS isn't the only IT system that hasn't made it. MP Richard Bacon is a member of the Public Accounts Committee.
We looked at this as long ago as 2004, and at that time there was a whole plethora of different projects ongoing that had been launched since the 1991 Gulf War, 5 or 6 different projects, the aim of which was to manage the materiel across the supply chain and make sure that there was what they called total visibility of all the military assets during the consignment. But none of them has really come to fruition.
People might think, well, they have had a lot of time to sort this out.
I am used to departments of state saying that they're going to do things and they're not quite getting round to doing them because something else comes along and their attention is distracted. But this is now becoming a very, very serious problem.
So as the MOD has long recognised the need to improve its systems for tracking equipment once it's in use, why hasn't it been able to do it? Francis Tusa, editor of Military Logistics International, says it's a cultural problem.
Until very recently, logistics and support more broadly, maintenance of vehicles and so forth, that was regarded, to put it mildly, as unsexy, and the people who tended to be in command very much looked down on people from a logistics support background. And this was simply because logistics is what other people do.
And what has this meant for investment and the kind of IT systems that the British Army has?
The people who command at the top levels, the people who actually authorise money being spent, come from, for what you might phrase, the warrior class. So in the RAF, it's the fast jet pilots. In the Navy, it's submarine commanders, frigate commanders. In the Army, infantrymen, cavalrymen. These are the people who command and make the decisions on money. And quite frankly, if they're told, how about you buy, let's just say, 2 fewer aircraft in a batch of 120, but we actually buy more spare parts or a different way of maintaining an aircraft. Quite frankly, 9 times out of 10, 99 times out of 100, the warrior class will just look at the logistician who has suggested this fix and will probably shake their head and ignore them. It is something that has happened for centuries. It is changing, but it's changing incredibly slowly.
And so the outcome is a system that's outdated and inadequate. Nowhere is this more obvious than at the MoDs Fast Warehouse at Bicester in Oxfordshire. Andy Gilbertson is a rep for the PCS, the Public and Commercial Services Union, which represents admin workers at military stores.
I was once taken to an area which was called the swivel chair section, and I expected to see an area which was decked out with computers and servers and interfaces, and I was amazed to see that at one end of a huge bank of tables were 3 computers, one each belonging to our major industry partners, and on the other end of the desk were 3 other computers which were the individual service computers and obviously the store's computer. And I was amazed to see a lady take a requirement from the industry computer and literally push her chair, oblique swivel her chair, down to the other end of the desks and import it onto that system manually. Now, to me, that is absolutely amazing, but that is what happens.
So let me just understand this. You've got one computer for each of your 3 major industry partners. You've then got a separate computer for the Army, the Navy and the Air Force, because they don't speak to each other. And then you've got your own store's computers, and you have a lady who takes the messages from one and has to scoot along and input the information from one computer into another.
In essence, that is correct.
Do you believe the swivel chair section is still in operation today?
To the best of my knowledge, that swivel chair, as I described it, will still be in operation.
We asked to see inside one of these stores, but the MoD wouldn't let us. In March, the National Audit Office questioned their commitment to improving old-fashioned procedures for stock-taking and distribution.
Compromises have been made between cost and functionality. Some projects that have been funded have only been approved after costs were reduced, usually stripping their functionality.
Or, to put it bluntly, money has been wasted because of a cheese-paring approach to IT. PCS union official Andy Gilbertson recalls one unsuccessful effort to integrate the separate systems used by the Army, Navy and the Air Force to order equipment.
Several years ago, they actually spent £160 million developing such a system, which never actually saw the light of day because it never got to the point of development.
So, at the moment then, the Army, the Navy and the Air Force all have different systems talking to you in terms of demanding equipment and in terms of you then communicating with them and telling them what equipment is available and when it's coming to them.
Generally speaking, that is correct.
And that's despite a specific investment of £160 million specifically to address that question.
Yes, that was related to a system called the Defence Stores Management Solution, and it never saw the light of day. It was binned after several years of investment, and the team that was running with it were disbanded, and here we are today talking about the very similar issues.
But when the Army alone deals with 845,000 lines of stock, how easy is it to merge the supply chain for the 3 services? Andrew Booton used to work in logistics for the MoD and is now a defence consultant. He points out that one of the major difficulties is the way in which the Army, Navy and Air Force have traditionally operated as distinct and sometimes competing units.
There are considerable challenges and legacy hurdles that have to be overcome. Let's remember that only a couple of decades ago there was no real joint logistics interaction, and that centuries of logistic processes and culture had to be melded together into one coherent whole. It's not like merging 3 banks or a high street chain of shops, for example. I think also we're up against technological barriers. What technology is available now and what technology is emerging? Do we hang around and wait for that emerging technology to reach a satisfactory technological readiness level? Or do we apply it immediately and just think, well, that's probably good enough? And therefore, if you're not careful, you end up chasing technology, delaying implementation programs until the technology is perceived to be at a suitable maturity.